Okay, this chapter ties everything together. This chapter will discuss the physiological adaptations that occur in response to both endurance exercise training and resistance training. A major objective of this chapter is to tie together much of the physiology that has been presented in the earlier chapters, because many tissues and organ systems are either directly or indirectly affected by training programs. In the discussion of endurance training, we consider separately the physiological changes that promote an increase in Vo2 max from those adaptations associated with improvements in prolonged submaximal performance. This is because Vo2 max is closely linked to the maximal capacity of the cardiovascular system to deliver blood to the working muscles. The ability to sustain long-term submaximal exercise is linked more to the maintenance of muscle. The ability to sustain long-term submaximal exercise is linked to the maintenance of muscle fiber homeostasis due to specific biochemical properties of working muscles. This chapter also explores the physiology of strength development, further because endurance training causes adaptations in muscle that may conflict the adaptations associated with strength training programs. We discussed the issue of whether concurrent resistance and endurance training results in compromised increase in muscular strength compared to resistance training alone. Let's begin with the introduction to the principles of training. The principles of training. The three principles of training are overload, specific, specificity, and reversibility. The principles are introduced here and applied in chapters 16 and 17, training for fitness, and chapters 21, training for performance. Overload and reversibility. The overload principle refers to the fact that an organ system, example cardiovascular or tissue, example skeletal muscle, must be exercised at a level beyond which it is accustomed in order to achieve training adaptation. The system or tissue gradually adapts to this overload. This pattern of progressively overloading the system or tissue as adaptations occur result in improved function over time. The typical variables that constitute the overload include intensity, duration, and frequency, days per week of exercise. The corollary of the overload principle is the principle of reversibility. The principle of reversibility refers to the fact that fitness gains by exercising can, at an overload, are quickly lost when training is stopped and the overload is removed. Specificity. The principle of specificity refers to the effect that exercise training is specific to muscles involved, that activity, the fiber types recruited, the principal energy system involved, aerobic versus anaerobic, the velocity of the contraction, and the type of muscle contraction, eccentric, concentric, or isometric. Indeed, the arms do not undergo significant training adaptation during 10-week running exercise program. Further, this also means that if an individual participates in a low intensity distance running program that utilizes the slow twitch muscle fibers in the legs, there is little to no training effect occurring in fast twitch fibers in the leg muscles. Specificity also refers to the types of adaptations occurring in a muscle as a result of training. If a muscle is engaged in endurance training exercise, the primary adaptations are increases in capillaries, increases in the capacity of the, or increases in capillaries and mitochondrial volume. which increase the capacity of the muscle to produce energy aerobically. If a muscle is engaged in heavy resistance training, the primary adaptation is increasing the quantity of contractile proteins. The overload principle, in summary, the overload principle reveals that for a training effect to occur, a system or tissue must be challenged with the intensity, duration, or frequency of the exercise to which it is accustomed. Over time, the tissue or system adapts to the increased load. The reversibility principle is a corollary to the overload principle and refers to the fact that the fitness gains are lost when training is stopped. The principle of specificity indicates that the training is limited to the muscle fibers involved in the activity. In addition, that muscle fiber adapts to the specificity specifically to the type of activity. Specificity endurance exercise training promotes an increase in both mitochondria and capillary density in muscle, whereas resistance training results in increase in contractile proteins in skeletal muscle. Endurance training and Vo2 Max. Maximal oxygen uptake, also called maximal aerobic maximal maximal aerobic power of Vo2 Max is a measure of maximal capacity of the body to transfer and use oxygen during dynamic exercise using large muscle groups, example legs. Chapter 4 introduced the concept, and Chapter 9 and 10 showed how specific cardiovascular and pulmonary variables respond to graded exercise up to Vo2 Max. The following sections discuss the effect of endurance exercise programs and the increase in Vo2 Max and physiological changes that are responsible for this exercise, training programs, and changes in Vo2 Max. Endurance training programs. The increase in Vo2 Max commonly involve continuous dynamic exercise using a large muscle mass, example running, cycling, or swimming. Training programs and changes in Vo2 Max. For 60 minutes per session, 3 or more times per week, and intensity greater intensity greater than 50% Vo2 Max. However, abundant evidence also reveals that high intensity interval training, example 30 seconds all out efforts to improve also improves Vo2 Max. Details about how to design a training program for the average individual and the athletes are presented in chapters 16 and 21 respectively. While endurance training programs of the 2 to 3 months duration typically cause an increase in Vo2 Max, between 15 and 20%. The range of improvement can be seen as low as 2 to 3% for those who start the program with the high VO2 max values, and as high as 50% for individuals with a low initial VO2 max values or genetic potential for large improvements in VO2 max with training. In addition, individuals with low VO2 max prior to training can experience improvements with relatively low training intensities. Example, 40% to 50% VO2 max, where individuals with high training VO2 max values may require higher training intensities. Examples, greater than 70% VO2 max. Relative VO2 max Relative VO2 max, example, normalize to body weight, can vary widely in adults depending upon their age, health, and training status. Relative VO2 max, example, normalize to body weight. For example, VO2 max can be less than 20 milliliters per kilogram per minute in patients with severe cardiovascular and pulmonary disease, and more than 80 milligrams per kiloliters per minute in world-class distance runners and cross-country skiers. Table 13.1. Table 13.1. Table 13.1. VO2 max values measured in healthy and diseased individuals. The extremely high VO2 max values possessed by elite male and female endurance athletes are the genetic gift of large cardiovascular capacity and high percentage of slow muscle fibers. Indeed, studies have concluded that heritability of VO2 max in untrained state is approximately 50%. In other words, about 50% individuals' VO2 max is determined by genetics, along with environmental influences. Further, research indicates that magnitude of improvement in VO2 max in response to exercise training is also genetically determined. For example, following a centralized training program, there are a wide variation of VO2 max improvements among individuals. It is estimated that the heredity of the training in VO2 max is approximately 47%. Evidence points to a difference in mitochondrial DNA as being important in both the individual differences in initial example untrained VO2 max and training induce improvements in VO2 max. Genetically gifted individuals who show large improvements in example 40% to 50% increase in VO2 max following endurance training are often referred to as high responders to exercise training. Show large improvements equals high responders to exercise training. See a closer look 13.1 for more information on this topic. A closer look. Impact of the genetics on VO2 max and individual exercise training responses. The link between genetics and VO2 max, along between subject variations in exercise training responses, have been studied for over 2 decades. An important study in investigating genetics and exercise adaptations is known as the Heritage Family Study. This investigation has made major contribution to our understanding of role that genetics plays in determining both VO2 max and the biological response to exercise training. Together, the Heritage Family Study and the numerous other studies revealed the following information about the role that genetics play in determining VO2 max and the training-induced improvements in VO2 max. Heritability determines the approximately 50% of VO2 max in sedentary adults. In and other, where it's 50% VO2 of the VO2 max of untrained subjects can be explained by genetic differences between individuals. Genetics also plays a key role in determining how individuals respond to training, and a large variation exists between people in their ability to improve VO2 max in response to training. For example, while the average training induced improvements in VO2 max is 15 to 20% in some individuals are low responders to exercise training and achieve only a 2 to 3% improvement in VO2 max. In contrast, some individuals are high responders to exercise. For example, while an average training induced improvement in VO2 max is 15 to 20%, some individuals are low responders to exercise training. Achieve only 2 to 3% in VO2 improvement. In contrast, some individuals are high responders in exercise and achieve a 50% improvement in VO2 max. These large variations in training response illustrate the fact that the heritability of the training adaptations is great and approaches 47%. The studies reveal that only those individuals with both the genetic makeup for a high VO2 max in untrained state and with the genetic background to be a high responder to exercise training have the potential to achieve a high VO2 max value required to successfully complete endurance events. Example, 500-meter run at Olympic level. Recent heritage family studies show that the large variation in human additive responses to exercise, example, responders versus non-responders, is due to 21 different genes that play an important role in training adaptation. Please see Mann et al. 2014 and Tucker and Collins 2012 in the suggested readings list to learn more about the impact of genetics on VO2 max and the training adaptations due in exercise. In addition to the genetic factors, both the intensity and the duration of the exercise and training have an important impact on the magnitude and in training induced changes in VO2 max. For example, for long periods of endurance training, example 2 to 3 years, can produce large improvements. Example 40 to 50% increases in VO2 max in genetically gifted individuals. Also, high intensity in endurance training can increase VO2 max by as much as 50% in individuals with genetic potential to respond favorably to endurance training. For instance, the study revealed a large example 30% to 50% improvement and linear increase in VO2 max over 10 weeks of high intensity exercise training. These results are in contrast with many training studies that show the leveling off of VO2 max values after only a few weeks of training. The much larger increase in VO2 max with this 10-week training program was due to the higher intensity and frequency of the duration training than the commonly employed in endurance training programs. We discuss the physiological adaptations that are responsible for endurance training induced improvements in VO2 max. In summary, endurance training programs that increase VO2 max involve the large muscle mass and continuous activity for 20 to 60 minutes. Endurance training programs that increase VO2 max involve a large muscle mass and continuous activity for 20 to 60 minutes per session, 3 or more times per week, at an intensity of 50% to 85% VO2 max. Similar continuous endurance training, high intensity interval training also improves VO2 max. Although VO2 max increases the average of about 15 to 20% as a result of endurance training program, the largest training-induced increases in VO2 max generally occur in those genetically gifted individuals who are often referred to as high responders to endurance training adaptations. Genetic predisposition accounts for 50% of the one's VO2 max value. Very strenuous and or prolonged exercise, prolonged endurance training can increase VO2 max in normal sedentary individuals by up to 50%. Why does exercise training improve VO2 max? The calculation of oxygen consumption via Frick's equation is illustrated as shown. VO2 max equals maximal cardiac output times maximal AVO2 difference. As maximal oxygen uptake in the product of systemic blood flow, cardiac output, and the systemic oxygen extraction, arteriovenous AV oxygen difference training induced changes in VO2 max occur due to increased maximal cardiac output, increased maximal arteriovenous difference at some combination difference or some combination of both. Recall from chapter 9 that cardiac output is determined by the product of heart rate times stroke volume. Recall from chapter 9 that cardiac output is determined by the product of heart rate times stroke volume. VO2 max equals maximal cardiac output times arteriovenous oxygen difference. Also remember that arteriovenous oxygen difference is a measure of how much oxygen is removed from the arterial blood and used by the tissues. Again, the Frick's equation reveals the training-induced increases in VO2 max can be due to increased cardiac output. Increase arteriovenous oxygen difference or increase in both. Research reveals that in untrained subjects, relatively short durations, 1 to 4 months of endurance training increases both VO2 max plus 20% and maximal cardiac output plus 10%, but does not significantly increase the maximal arteriovenous oxygen difference. Figure 13.1. Duration of endurance training. Progression of endurance training induced changes in VO2 max, maximal cardiac output, and maximal arteriovenous difference in healthy sedentary adults during 4 to 32 months of training. Therefore, following short duration training, all the training induced improvement in VO2 max is due to increase in maximal cardiac output. In contrast, studies reveal that a longer duration of training, example 32 months or more, increases VO2 max by increasing both maximal cardiac output plus 15% and the maximal arterioventricular difference plus 25%. Figure 13.1. Note that Following both short and long duration training, the exercise-induced increase in maximal cardiac output is entirely due to the increase in stroke volume because maximal heart rate either remains constant or slightly decreases. What causes the maximal stroke volume and the maximal arterial venous oxygen difference to increase as a result of endurance training? The answers are provided in the next two sections. Stroke volume. Recall that stroke volume is the amount of blood ejected from the heart with each beat. And is equal to the difference between the end diastolic volume and the end systolic volume. Note that exercise training does not increase maximal heart rate, and in fact, months of training result in a small increase in maximal heart rate. Therefore, all training-induced increases in maximal cardiac output just must come from increases in stroke volume. Figure 13.2 summarize the factors that can increase stroke volume in response to endurance training. Factors increasing stroke volume: plasma volume, filling time and venous return, ventricular volume, and diastolic volume preload. Contractibility, total peripheral resistance, afterload, stroke volume. In belief, an increase in Hi, pretty kitty. Okay, I'll talk. My hands look so ashy. But I need to get back to studying Pretty Kitty. I love you. If you need me, just message me. Do you like the camera angle change? So you can actually see me pick up my markers and stuff? Okay, I'll call you for a little bit, but I have to go straight to bed after the exam because I work at 9. Cool. Therefore, in in brief, in br- in brief, an increase in end diastolic volume preload increased cardiac contractibility, or a decrease in total peripheral resistance afterload can increase stroke volume. Let's briefly discuss each of these factors relative to the increase in the maximal stroke volume that occurs with endurance training. Ooh, got us this forever. And diastolic volume. One of the key factors responsible for training induced increases in maximal stroke volume is an increase in end diastolic volume. An increase in end diastolic volume results in a stretch of the left ventricle and a corresponding increase in cardiac contractility via a Frank-Starling mechanism. Chapter 9. This increase in end diastolic volume in the endurance trained heart is likely the result of several training induced changes. A primary mechanism is the plasma volume increases with endurance training, and this contributes to augmented venous return and increased endosolic volume. These training induced changes in the plasma volume and increased stroke volume changes can occur rapidly. For example, a 6-day training program, 2 hour per day, 65% VO2 max can promote a 7% increase in VO2 max and increase the 11% increase in plasma volume. This training-induced increase in stroke volume is likely due to the increase in end diastolic volume. Also note that the prolonged endurance training, months to years, increases in the volume of the left ventricle with little change in ventricular wall thickness. This increase in ventricular volume will accumulate a larger end diastolic volume as predicted to contribute to the training-induced increase in stroke volume. Finally, endurance training not only increases stroke volume during maximal exercises, but also increases stroke volume at rest. This increase in resting stroke volume in endurance training athletes is likely due to increased end diastolic volume at rest that results from increased stretch of the myocardium, of the increased ventricular filling time associated with the slower resting heart rate, bradycardia. The the increase in resting stroke volume in endurance trained athletes is likely due to the increase in end diastolic volume at rest that results from the increased stretch of the myocardium because of the increased ventricular filling associated with the slower resting heart rate, bradycardia, that occurs following endurance training. Cardiac contractility. Cardiac contractility refers to the strength of the cardiac muscle contraction when the fiber length and diastolic volume, afterload, peripheral resistance, and heart rate remain constant. Although an acute exercise bout increases the cardiac contractibility due to the action of the sympathetic nervous system on the ventricle, it is difficult to determine whether the inherent contractility of the human heart changes with endurance training. This is bad because the factors that affect contractility, example heart rate, heart rate and afterload are themselves are themselves are themselves although the acute exercise bout increases cardiac contractility due to the action of the sympathetic nervous system on the ventricle, it is difficult to determine whether the inherent or contractility of the human heart changes with endurance training. This is because the factors that affect contractility and then systolic volume, heart rate, and afterload are themselves affected by endurance training. Nonetheless, animal studies indicate that high intensity exercise training increases cardiac pumping ability by increasing the force of ventricular contraction. Further, research reveals that endurance endurance exercise training increases left ventricular twist mechanics, resulting in increased stroke volume. Together, these findings indicate that the endurance exercise training improves ventricular contractility in both humans and animals. Afterload. At, the term afterload refers to the peripheral resistance against which the term afterload refers to the peripheral resistance against which the ventricle 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 is contract. The term afterload refers to the peripheral resistance against which the ventricle is contracting as it tries to push blood into the aorta. The afterload is important because when the heart contracts against a high peripheral resistance, stroke volume will be reduced compared to a lower peripheral resistance. Following an endurance training program, trained muscles offer less resistance to blood flow during maximal exercise due to a reduction in the sympathetic vasoconstrictor activity in the arterioles of the trained muscles. This decrease this decrease in resistance parallels the increase in maximal cardiac output, and so the mean arterial blood pressure during exercise remains unchanged. Arterial venous O2 difference. As mentioned earlier, endurance training induced increases in Vo2 max following many months of training are due to the elevation in both cardiac output example stroke volume increases and the arterial ventricular dip oxygen difference. The training induced increases in the arterial difference is due to the increased oxygen extraction from the blood. The increased capacity of the muscle to contract extract O2 following a training is primarily due to the increase in capillary density with an increase in mitochondrial volume being of the secondary importance. The enlarged capillary density in trained muscle accommodates the increase in muscle blood flow during maximal exercise, decreases the diffusion distance to the mitochondria, and slows the rate of the blood flow to allow more time for oxygen diffusion from the capillary to the muscle fiber. Changes in the capillary density parallel alterations in leg blood flow, Vo2 max with training. The increases in mitochondrial number following endurance training increases the muscle's fibers' ability to consume oxygen and contribute to the expanded arteriovenous oxygen differences. Note, however, a mitochondria, the capacity of mitochondria to use O2 exceeds the capability of the heart to deliver O2, making mitochondrial number not the key factor limiting Vo2 max. Figure 313 provides a summary of the factors responsible for the increase in Vo2 max associated with endurance training program. Preload down. Preload down. Preload up, afterload down. Sympathetic nervous system acting actively to work with muscle. Muscle blood flow up. Capillaries, mitochondria up. Arterioventricular up. Maximal cardiac output, Vo2 max. Finally, the two scientists who have made a major contribution to our understanding of physiological effects of exercise training are doctors John O. Hawley and Bennett Salton. See a look back, important people in science for more of these outstanding scientists. A look back, important people. Dr. John O. Hawley, MD, and Dr. Ben Salt, MD, PhD, Olympic Prize winners. The International Olympic Committee established the IOC Olympic Prize in Sports Sciences to recognize international leaders in research in the sport sciences. The awardee receives $500,000 and an Olympic medal. The prize is awarded every 2 years. In 2000, the International Olympic Committee awarded the IOC prize to Dr. John O. Hawley. The prize recognizes his outstanding contributions to our understanding of the effects of endurance training on muscle and metabolisms and how they affect endurance performance, heart disease, diabetes, and aging. The simple sentence cannot do justice to the more than 382 studies he published in the very best research journals, or the impact he has had on the field of exercise science and preventive medicine. Throughout his career, Dr. Hawley has trained several generations of scientists to follow in his footsteps. His list of postdoctoral fellows beginning in the 1960s from who's who in exercise physiology. The research contributions of his postdoctoral fellows multiply many times over. The effect Dr. Hawley has had a field of exercise physiology. Dr. Hawley contributes his active research career at Washington University School of Medicine in areas of caloric restriction and aging and carbohydrate and fat metabolism. In 2002, International Olympic Committee awarded its IOC prize in sports medicine to Dr. Ben Salt. During a long and productive research career, Dr. Salt has published more than 451 studies that have broadly extended our understanding of exercise physiology. More specifically, Dr. Salt's work has improved our appreciation of training-induced changes in Vo2 Max and regulation of fuel utilization in skeletal muscle during exercise. Moreover, he performed classic bed rest studies revealing the importance of physiological changes that occur following prolonged periods of inactivity. You will note that many of Dr. Salt's studies are created throughout this book as a testament to importance of his research discoveries. Endurance, in summary, in healthy sedentary subjects, the training induced improvements in VO2 max that occur following a short-term training, example, approximately 4 months, are due to increases in cardiac output alone. However, the training induced improvements in VO2 max that occur following duration training 32 months are a result in both increases in maximal cardiac output, example stroke volume increases, and increase in the atrioventricular difference. The training and, and induced increase in maximal stroke volume is due to both an increase in preload and decrease in afterload. The increased preload is primarily due to increase in end-diastolic ventricular volume and associated with increase in plasma volume. The decrease in afterload is due to decrease in arterial constriction and is trained muscles, increasing the maximal muscle blood flow with no change in the mean arterial blood pressure. The training induced increases in AVO2 difference is due to an increase in the capillary density and trained muscles, which is indeed to accept the increase in maximal muscle blood flow. The greater capillary density also for a slow red blood cell transmit time through the muscle, providing enough time for oxygen diffusion from the capillary into the muscle fiber. The training-induced increase in arterial difference is due to increase in capillary density of trained muscles. Okay. Endurance training affects on performance and homeostasis. The ability to perform prolonged submaximal work is dependent on the maintenance of homeostasis during the activity. Endurance training results in a more rapid transition from rest to steady state exercise. Reduced reliance on a limited liver and muscle glycogen stores, and numerous cardiovascular and thermoregulatory adaptations that assist in maintaining homeostasis. Many of these training-induced adaptations are due to structural and biochemical changes in the muscle, as we will discuss in detail in the next few pages. However, a portion of these adaptations is related to the factors external to the muscle. This needs to be stated at the beginning of this section because while we focus on the link between changes in skeletal muscle and performance, there is evidence that some improvements in performance occur rapidly and might precede structural or biochemical changes in skeletal muscle. This suggests that the initial metabolic adaptations to endurance training might consist of changes in the nervous system or neurohormonal adaptations, which are followed by biochemical adaptations in muscle fibers. In the introduction of this chapter, we mentioned that the increase in submaximal performance following an endurance training program is due to a biochemical and structural changes in the trained skeletal muscle than to the increase in VO2 max. Common endurance training induced changes include increases in percentage of slow muscle fibers, example fast to slow fiber type shift, increased mitochondrial volume in fibers, added ability of muscle to metabolize fat, improve muscle oxidant capacity, and increase capillary density. Indeed, the training-induced changes in the muscle primarily determine the overall physiological responses to a given submaximal exercise bout. Let's begin our discussion with an overview of endurance training and induced changes in muscle fiber types and capillary number in skeletal muscle. Endurance training induced changes in fiber type and capillary. It is well established that endurance training results in a shift in fast to slow muscle fiber type. Recall from chapter 8 that exercise induced shift in muscle fiber type involves a reduction in the amount of fast myosin in the muscle and an increase in slow myosin isoforms. This is significant because slow myosin isoforms have lower myosin AT phase activity, but are able to perform more work with less ATP utilization. Example, more efficient. This fast and slow shift in myosin isoforms is physiologically important because it increases mechanical efficiency and therefore can potentially improve endurance performance. The magnitude of this exercise-induced fiber type shift is dependent upon both intensity and duration of the training sessions, along with the total years of endurance training. For example, the number of type 1 slow fibers in leg muscles of distance runners is correlated to the number of years training. This suggests that training-induced increase in the number of type 1 fibers is progressive and can continue during several years of training. Note, however, that most humans and animal training studies indicate that although endurance training promotes a fast to slow fiber shift in active muscles, this shift does not result in a complete shift from fast to slow fibers. Therefore, as mentioned earlier in the chapter, the extremely high aerobic capacity possessed in elite male and female athletes is likely the genetic gift of high percentage of slow muscle fibers. Endurance training increases the capillary capacity of skeletal muscle fibers of trained individuals. In fact, a strong correlation exists between the subject's Vo2 max and the number of capillaries surrounding the muscle fibers in trained limbs. This exercise-induced capitalization in the skeletal muscle is advantageous because the diffusion differences for oxygen and substrate delivered to the muscle fibers is reduced. Similarly, the distance for diffusion and removal of metabolic waste from the fiber is also increased. A closer look. Endurance training increases mitochondrial volume and turnover in skeletal muscle. As discussed in the text, both endurance exercise training, example, continuous submaximal exercise, and high-intensity interval training promote synthesis of new mitochondria called mitochondrial biogenesis, resulting in an increased volume of both subsarcomella and intermyofibrillar mitochondria in the trained muscle fibers. Research reveals that the exercise-induced increase in mitochondrial volume is primarily due to an increase in mitochondrial size and not an increase in the number of mitochondria. This exercise-induced increase in mitochondrial volume in muscle fibers results in an improved oxidative capacity and increased ability to use fat as a fuel source. This improved ability to metabolize fat as a fuel during exercise is advantageous because it spares carbohydrates and prevents depletion of limited carbohydrate stores in both muscle and liver. In addition to promoting mitochondrial biogenesis, endurance exercise training also increases the removal of damaged mitochondria. Specifically, endurance exercise training promotes the breakdown and removal of old and damaged mitochondria. These damaged mitochondria are replaced with new and healthy mitochondria that are larger in size. The process of removal and replacement of muscle mitochondria is commonly referred to as a mitochondrial turnover. The removal of the damaged mitochondria occurs via a process called mitophagy. In short, mitophagy is the selective removal of old and damaged mitochondria by lysosomes. The end result of the exercise-induced increase in mitochondrial turnover is that the muscle mitochondrial population in untrained individuals is larger and healthier than a mitochondrial population found in muscle fibers of untrained individuals. As mentioned earlier, this increase in volume of healthy mitochondrial results in improved oxidative capacity and increased ability of the muscle fibers to metabolize fats. Endurance training increases mitochondrial content and skeletal muscle fibers. The two subpopulations of mitochondria exist in the skeletal muscle. One population rests immediately beneath the sarcomella, subsarcomella mitochondria, and the second larger group of mitochondria, example 80% of the total mitochondria, are dispersed around the contractile protein, myofibrillar mitochondria. Endurance training and high intensity interval training can rapidly increase the volume of both mitochondrial subpopulation and the active skeletal muscle fibers. For example, mitochondrial volume can increase in muscle fibers within the first 5 days of training program. Prolonged endurance training can typically increase the mitochondrial volume by 50% to 100% within the first 6 weeks of training. However, the magnitude of exercise-induced increase in mitochondria in the muscle is dependent upon both the exercise intensity, and duration of exercise session. See closer look 13.2 for details on the exercise-induced changes in mitochondrial volume and mitochondrial turnover in muscle fibers. The increase in endurance performance that results from the mitochondrial biogenesis is due to the changes in the muscle metabolism during exercise. Let's briefly examine some of the key changes. These key changes. At the onset of exercise, ATP is converted to ADP and PI. In the muscle fibers in order to develop tension. Inorganic phosphate in the muscle fibers in order to develop tension. The increase in ADP concentration in the cytoplasm is the immediate stimulus for ATP producing systems to meet the ATP demands for the cross bridges. Phosphocreatine responds immediately to this ATP need, followed by glycolysis, and finally mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation. The latter process becomes the primary source of ATP during the steady-state phase of exercise. How does endurance training affect these oxygen uptake responses at the onset of submaximal and steady-state work? The steady-state VO2 measured during submaximal work test is not affected by endurance training. This means that the mitochondria in the working muscle are consuming the same number of O2 molecules per minute. However, because training results in the increase in the size of mitochondria in muscles, the ATP producing chore handled by the mitochondria differs between untrained and trained skeletal muscles. This point is illustrated in the following example. Suppose an untrained muscle cell has only one small mitochondria, and the breakdown of 100 units of ATP per minute is needed for the muscle to consume 2 liters of O2 per minute to sustain a constant level of exercise. The breakdown of 100 units of ATP per minute results in the formation of 100 units of ADP per minute in the cytosol of fiber. See figure 13.4. Figure 13.4. Influence of mitochondrial size on the change in systolic ADP concentration during submaximal exercise. Note that the training-induced increases in mitochondrial size in the muscle improve the rate of ADP transfer into the mitochondria, resulting in a lower ADP concentration in the cytosol and less stimulation of glycolysis. Muscle fiber before training, 100 units ADP, exercise, VO2 equals 2 liters per minute. Muscle fiber training, mitochondria, 150 units of ADP, 50 units of ADP, VO2 equals 2 liters per minute. Remember that aerobic formation of ATP requires ADP to be transferred into the mitochondria to combine with inorganic phosphate to form ATP. After training, when the size of mitochondria in the cell has doubled, the rate of ADP transportation into the mitochondria has doubled. Therefore, the ADP concentration in the cytosol increases only have as much because of additional mitochondria present to take up the ADP. This is important for the two reasons. First, the lower ADP concentration results in the less phosphocreatine depletion because the reaction for this is ADP plus phosphocreatine to ATP plus C. Second, the lower ADP concentration in the cell also result in a less stimulation of glycolysis. Therefore, a reduced production of lactate and hydrogen ions. Collectively, the reduced stimulation of glycolysis is due to the lower ADP and higher phosphocreatine concentrations following the endurance training results in a less reliance on anaerobic glycolysis to provide ATP at the onset of exercise. The net result is lower oxygen deficit, less depletion of phosphocreatine, and the reduction of lactate and hydrogen ions formation. Figure 13.5 shows the biochemical adaptations following the endurance training result in a faster rise in oxygen uptake curve at the onset of work with less disruption of homeostasis. Endurance training reduces O2 deficit at the onset of work. Before training, after training, oxygen uptake, faster rise in oxygen uptake, less lactate formation, less phosphocreatine depletion. Training induced changes in muscle. Plasma glucose is a primary fuel for nervous system, and therefore maintaining plasma glucose is vital. Thus, it is not surprising that endurance training promotes biochemical changes in skeletal muscles that assist in maintaining a constant blood glucose concentration. During prolonged submaximal exercise, specifically endurance training, results in a decrease in the use of glucose, carbohydrates as fuel, and increase in fat metabolism during prolonged submaximal exercise. Together, these changes spare plasma glucose and increase the reliance on fat as a fuel source in skeletal muscle during exercise. Details of how endurance exercise training alters both carbohydrate and fat metabolism are explained in the next sections. Endurance training results in a decreased utilization of plasma glucose during prolonged submaximal exercise. Glucose uptake by contracting skeletal muscles occurs via facility diffusion and requires the presence of glucose to transfer protein, GLUT4, on the muscle cell membrane, example sarcomella. Endurance training increases the capacity to transfer glucose into the skeletal muscle fibers by increasing both the number of GLUT4 glucose transporters and ability of insulin to promote and transfer glucose into the muscle. Given these training-induced changes, it's surprising that endurance training results in a decreased reliance on carbohydrate as an energy source during prolonged submaximal exercise. Indeed, the uptake of oxidation of glucose from the blood during submaximal exercise is decreased in trained individuals. Consequently, trained individuals are better able to maintain blood glucose levels during prolonged exercise. The mechanisms by which training decreases the utilization of blood glucose are not well known, but could be due to the reduced movement of GLUT4 glucose transporters from the cytosol to the muscle membrane. Regardless of the mechanism responsible for the training-induced decrease in glucose metabolism during exercise, the slower utilization of glucose. This slower utilization of glucose during prolonged exercise in trained individuals is logical adaptation that would decrease the risk of developing hypoglycemia, example low blood glucose levels, during prolonged exercise, about example running a marathon. Exercise training increases fat metabolism during exercise. Endurance training increases fat metabolism during submaximal exercise by boosting the delivery of fat to the muscle and expanding extending the muscle's ability to metabolize fat. Figure 13.6. Figure 13.6. Endurance training increases fat metabolism and decreases muscle glucose utilization during prolonged submaximal exercise. This training induced increase in fat metabolism during submaximal exercise is achieved by increasing the capillary density and increasing the number of mitochondria. This training induced increase in fat metabolism during submaximal exercise is achieved by increasing the capillary density and increasing the number of mitochondria in the muscle fiber. Endurance training, capillary density, mitochondria number, slower blood flow in the muscle, and increased free fatty acid transporters. Increased uptake of free fatty acid transporters, free fatty acid utilization, increased beta oxidation enzymes, and carotene transferase spares plasma glucose. The training induced increase in fat delivery to muscle is accomplished by three training induced adaptations: increasing capillary density, which enhances the delivery of free fatty acids to the muscle, expanded ability to transfer free fatty acid across the sarcolemma, and improved capacity to move free fatty acid from the cytoplasm to the mitochondria. Also, endurance exercise training increases the muscle's ability to metabolize fat by increasing the volume of mitochondria in the muscle fiber. This is important because fat metabolism occurs in the mitochondria, whereby beta oxidation converts free fatty acids to acetyl-CoA under metabolism in the Krebs cycle. More details of how endurance training increases fat metabolism follows. Intramuscular fat provides about 50% of the lipid oxidized during exercise, and plasma free fatty acids provide the rest. The uptake of free fatty acid by the muscle is proportional to the free fatty acid concentration in the plasma. For free fatty acid to enter the muscle fiber, plasma free fatty acid must be transferred across the cell membrane to the cytoplasm and then into the mitochondria before oxidation can occur. Movement of free fatty acid into the muscle cell involves the carrier molecule whose capacity to transfer free fatty acid can be concentrated as a high plasma free fatty acid concentrations. However, endurance training increases the capacity of the free fatty acid transfer of free fatty acid across the cell membrane, so that compared to the untrained individual, a trained individual can transfer more free fatty acid across the muscle cell membrane. This is due to the dynamic training induced increase in both fatty acid binding protein and fatty acid translocase fat that transfer the fatty acids across the sarcolemma into the fiber. This increased ability to transfer free fatty acid facilitated by a greater capillary density in the trained muscle, which slows the rate of blood flow past the fiber membrane, allowing more time for the free fatty acid to be transferred into the cell. Endurance exercise training also improves the ability to transfer free fatty acid into the mitochondria, where fat oxidation occurs. A key step into free fatty acid transfer into the mitochondria involves a key step in free fatty acid transfer into the mitochondria involves both the carnitine transferase and fatty acid translocase. CPT1 and fat work together to increase the free fatty acid entry into the mitochondria, and much of the training induced increase in fat oxidation is linked to the changes in mitochondrial fat. The increase in mitochondrial size with endurance training increases the surface area of the mitochondrial membranes and the amount of carnitine and fat, such as free fatty acids, can be transferred at a faster rate from the cytoplasm to the mitochondrial oxidation. The faster rate of the transfer from the cytoplasm to the mitochondria favors the movement of more free fatty acid into the muscle from the plasma. As mentioned previously, endurance training causes increase in both subpopulations of mitochondria and subsarcomella and intermyofibrillar and muscle fibers. These increases in mitochondrial size elevates the enzymes involved in fatty acid beta oxidation. This results in an increased rate at which acetyl-CoA molecules are formed from the free fatty acid for entry into the Krebs cycles, where citrate, the first molecule in a cycle, is formed. A high rate of beta oxidation results in an increased levels of citrate in the muscle. This is important because high levels of citrate inhibit PFK, rate enzyme in glycolysis, which reduces the carbohydrate metabolism. The result of all these adaptations is an increase in lipid oxidation and less reliance in carbohydrate metabolism during exercise, thus preserving limited muscle and liver glycogen stores. In summary, training improves the ability of muscle fibers to maintain homeostasis during prolonged exercise. Regular bouts of endurance training result in a fast to slow shift in muscle fiber types and also increase the number of capillaries surrounding the trained muscle fibers. Endurance exercise also increases the size of the both subsarcomella and intermyofibrillar mitochondria. Increase in the exercise muscles. The combination of the increase in density of capillaries and mitochondrial volume in the muscle fiber increases the capacity to transfer free fatty acids from the plasma, cytoplasm, and mitochondria. The increase in enzymes of fatty acid of the fatty acid cycle increases the rate of formation of acetyl-CoA from free fatty acid for oxidation in the Krebs cycle. This increase in fatty acid oxidation and endurance train muscle spares liver and muscle glycogen and plasma glucose. These points are summarized in Figure 3.6. 13.6. Pyruvate plus NADH equals lactate and NAD. Increase mitochondrial numbers decreases lactate and H formation to maintain blood pH. Lactate formation occurs when there is accumulation of NADH and pyruvate in the cytoplasm of the cell, and lactate dehydrogenase is present. Increased mitochondrial number decreases lactate and H formation to maintain the blood pH. Mitochondria up increases free fatty acid oxidation and increases decreased PFK activity. This is important because high rates of citrate levels inhibit PFK, rate limit enzyme, and glycolysis. In summary, endurance training increases endogenous antioxidants in trained muscles, and these changes protect muscle fibers against free radical mediated damage and fatigue during prolonged endurance exercise. High intensity interval exercise training can increase the buffering capacity of the exercise exercise muscles. Endurance training does not increase muscle buffering capacity, but regular endurance training results in less disruption of blood pH during some muscle work because endurance trained muscles produce less lactate and hydrogen. Increase H4. Increase H4 from form of LADH. Increase mitochondrial uptake of pyruvate and NADH. Decrease lactate and H formation. Decrease pyruvate formation. Molecular basis of exercise training adaptation. Specificity. Endurance training, Vo2 Max training to increase Vo2 Max. Expected increases of Vo2 Max genetic disposition. Endurance training improves muscle antioxidant capacity. Free radicals are produced by contracting muscles, can damage muscle contractile protein. Training increases endogenous antioxidants, protects against oxidative damage and fatigue. Independent of the type of exercise stimulus, example, endurance or resistance exercise, the training induced adaptation that occurs in muscle fibers is a result of an increase in amount of specific proteins. The exercise-induced adaptation in skeletal muscle fibers are specific to the type of exercise stimulus. Example, resistance versus endurance exercise. Exercise-induced muscle adaptation occurs to the coordination between primary and secondary signaling pathways in muscle fibers. Four primary signals for exercise-induced muscle adaptation include muscle stretch, increases in cellular free calcium, elevated free radicals, and decreases in muscle phosphate energy levels. These primary signals then activate downstream secondary signaling pathways to promote gene expression. Seven secondary signals signaling molecules that contribute to exercise-induced muscle adaptation include AMP, PK, P38, PGC, A alpha, KMK. These signaling molecules are activated via one of the four primary signaling pathways and act directly on or indirectly in response to gene expression of specific muscle proteins. Exercise training improves acid-base balance during exercise. Lactate production during exercise. Pyruvate plus NADH, LDH, lactate, and NAD. Training adaptations. Increase mitochondrial number. Less carbohydrate utilization. Pyruvate form. Increases NADH shuttles. Less NADH available for lactic acid formation. Changes in LDH type. M4, M3H, M2H, heart form. H4 has lower affinity for pyruvate, equals less lactic acid formation. Increased mitochondrial number and blood pH. In summary, endurance training increases endogenous antioxidants in trained muscles, and these changes protect muscle fibers against free radical mediated damage and fatigue during prolonged endurance exercise. High intensity interval exercises can increase buffering capacity of exercise muscles. Endurance training does not increase muscle buffering capacity, but regular endurance training results in less distribution of blood pH during submaximal work because endurance trained muscles produce less lactate and H. Training adaptation, the big picture. Endurance resistance training increases specific muscle proteins. Exercise stress activates transcription. The process of training in induced muscle adaptation. Muscle contraction activates primary and secondary messengers, results in expression of genes of synthesis of proteins, peaks in 4 to 8 hours, back to baseline in 24 hours. This is why daily exercise is needed. mRNA and protein changes. Primary signal transduction pathways in skeletal muscle. Our understanding of the precise mechanisms that enable skeletal muscle to interpret and respond to different types of exercise remains incomplete. Nonetheless, several primary messengers participate in the exercise-induced adaptation that occur in skeletal muscle. The 4 primary signals for muscle adaptation during exercise include mechanical stimuli, increases in cellular calcium, elevated free radicals, and decreases in muscle phosphate energy levels. Primary signals lead to adaptations, increased protein synthesis. Effect depends on exercise stimulus and intensity and duration. Resistance versus training. Non-chemical stress, calcium via calodolin dependent kinase, free radicals, phosphate muscle energy levels, AMP ATP ratio activates AMPK. secondary messengers in skeletal muscle: AMPK, glucose uptake, fatty acid oxidation, and mitochondrial biogenesis. PC PGC1A increases in capillaries mitochondrial antioxidant enzymes activated by P3A and CAL-MK. The 7 secondary signaling pathways that play a major role in exercise-induced muscle adaptation. Specifically, we highlight the roles that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. AMP, glucose uptake, fatty acid oxidation, and mitochondrial biogenesis. PCGA increases in capillaries and mitochondrial antioxidants and enzymes activated by P3, A, and K. Muscle growth for resistance training, antioxidant enzymes. In summary, okay. Exercise included signaling. Illustration of intracellular signaling network mediated exercise induced skeletal muscle responses to endurance exercise training. Take note that both primary and secondary signals are improved in muscle adaptation to endurance exercise training. AMP, ATP, free radicals, up, calcineurin, cal MK, AMPK, P38, NFKB, increases capillaries and mitochondria, antioxidant enzymes activated by P38, KMK, CalMK. Synthesis of antioxidant enzymes, mitochondrial biogenesis, fast to slow fiber shift type. Illustration of time course of molecular responses to exercise training. See text for details. Seconds. Calcium, free radicals, AMP, ATP, minutes. Calcineurin, CAMK, AMPK, P38, NFKB, hours, PCG, mitochondrial biogenesis, days of training. The 3 primary signals involved in endurance exercise-induced muscle adaptation are increases in cellular free calcium, elevated free radicals, and decreases in muscle phosphate energy levels. The 3 primary signals then activate one or more of the downstream secondary pathways to promote gene expression. The 6 secondary signals molecules that contribute to endurance exercise induced muscle adaptation include AMPK, PCG, A alpha, calcineurin, P38, and NFKB. So PCGA, PGC-1A, both active calcineurin and PGC-1 alpha play important roles in endurance exercise induced fast to slow fiber transforms. Collectively, active CAMK, AMPK, and P38 all participate in activation of PGC-1 alpha. Active PGC-1 alpha is a master regulator for mitochondrial biogenesis. Both active PGCA alpha and NFB contribute to induced increase in muscle antioxidants. Detraining and Vo2 Max. Rapid decrease in Vo2 max, approximately 8% within 12 days, 20% after 84 days. Stroke volume, rapid loss of plasma volume, maximal atrioventricular difference, mitochondria down, oxidative capacity of muscles down, type 2 fibers up, type 2 fiber A down, type 2X fibers up. Initial decrease 12 days due to stroke decrease in stroke volume max. Later decrease to atrioventricular O2 difference. Detraining changes in Vo2 max and cardiovascular variables. Time of course changes in Vo2 max and associated cardiovascular variables with detraining. Which shows changes in maximal oxygen uptake, cardiac output, and stroke volume, heart rate, and oxygen extraction over a 84-day period of no training. Retraining and Vo2 max. Muscle mitochondria adapt quickly to training.